Julia and Marcelo had been together for years, and everyone considered them a solid and happy couple. Julia believed Marcelo was the love of her life and never imagined he could betray her. They shared dreams and plans for the future, confident that nothing could shake what they had built together. One day, Julia decided to surprise Marcelo. She planned a romantic dinner to celebrate their anniversary. With a bottle of wine in one hand and a small gift box in the other, she went to Marcelo's apartment, eager to see him. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and Julia felt light and happy. Upon arriving at Marcelo's building, she greeted the doorman with a radiant smile and climbed the stairs, excited to see Marcelo's surprised expression. When she reached the apartment, she noticed the door was ajar, which was unusual. Thinking he might be preparing something special as well, Julia entered quietly, trying not to spoil the surprise. As she walked through the living room, Julia heard muffled laughter coming from Marcelo's bedroom. Curious and slightly suspicious, she approached slowly. Opening the door, her world crumbled. Marcelo was in bed, passionately kissing Carla, her best friend, the person she trusted most after Marcelo. The sight was unbearable. The initial shock was replaced by intense pain, as if a knife had been driven into her heart. Julia felt as if the world was collapsing around her. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Marcelo, realizing Julia's presence, pulled away from Carla but showed no sign of remorse. On the contrary, his gaze was cold and distant. "Marcelo, how could you do this to me?" Julia asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Marcelo responded with a disdainful tone, "Julia, did you really think I loved you? Carla is much better for me than you ever were. I was only with you for convenience." Marcelo's words were like knives cutting through Julia's heart. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Carla, standing next to Marcelo, just watched the scene without showing any remorse. The double betrayal from two people she loved and trusted was a devastating blow. "Convenience?" Julia repeated, incredulous. "All this time, all the promises, they were lies." Marcelo shrugged. "I needed someone until I found something better. And Carla is that something better." Devastated, Julia realized there was nothing more to say. With the dignity she had left, she walked out of the apartment, leaving behind not only the gift and the romantic dinner but also all her hopes and dreams with Marcelo. Determined to move on, Julia made a drastic decision. She moved with her family to another city and never returned. She cut all ties with Marcelo and Carla, focusing on rebuilding her life away from those who betrayed her. The process wasn't easy. She faced sleepless nights, countless tears, and the difficult task of explaining to her family the reason for the sudden move. But Julia was strong and determined. With the unconditional support of her parents, she found the strength to move forward. Julia promised herself she would never let anyone play with her feelings like that again. She dedicated herself to her studies and career, building a solid and independent future. Years passed, and Julia, determined to overcome Marcelo and Carla's betrayal, rebuilt her life with resilience and courage. Shortly after the painful breakup, Julia discovered she was pregnant. The news was a mix of surprise and fear, but she decided to go through with the pregnancy, determined to raise her child with all the love she had in her heart. Months later, Julia gave birth to a beautiful boy, Pedro. Pedro's birth brought new light into Julia's life. Looking at her son's little face gave her the strength to face any adversity. Pedro became the center of her universe, and she dedicated herself entirely to him. Every smile, every step, and every word from Pedro was a reminder that she had something precious to fight for. The early years were challenging. Julia had to balance work and taking care of Pedro, often facing financial and emotional difficulties. But she never gave up. She worked tirelessly during the day and studied at night to improve her qualifications and provide a better life for her son. With the support of her parents, who also moved to the new city, Julia managed to establish a routine that allowed her to care for Pedro and pursue her goals. When Pedro was 4 years old, Julia met Rafael. It was on a Saturday afternoon, in the park where she usually took Pedro to play. Rafael, a kind and understanding man, was at the park with his nephew and ended up helping Pedro get up after a fall. That's how Julia and Rafael's eyes met for the first time. They started talking, and the empathy and affection between them were immediate. Rafael was a kind, patient man with a huge heart. He had also faced his own difficulties and understood well what it was like to need support and understanding. Gradually, Rafael and Julia began to grow closer, sharing their stories and dreams. He admired Julia's strength and determination, and she felt safe and valued by his side. Rafael fell in love with Julia, and his affection for Pedro grew every day. He treated him as if he were his own son, actively participating in his upbringing and establishing a special bond with the boy. Pedro, in turn, adored Rafael and saw him as a father figure. Rafael taught him to ride a bike, helped with homework, and was always present at the important moments of Pedro's life. After a year of dating, Rafael proposed to Julia. The proposal was simple but full of love and sincerity. During an intimate dinner at home, he knelt before Julia and Pedro, promising to love and care for them forever. With tears in her eyes and a smile on her face, Julia accepted, knowing she had found a man who truly loved and respected her. They married in a small, cozy ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Julia and Rafael's union not only sealed their love but also the formation of a happy and united family. With Rafael by her side, Julia felt she had finally found the balance and happiness she had long sought. Together, they raised Pedro with love, teaching him values like respect, honesty, and resilience. Julia's life, once marked by the pain of betrayal, transformed into a journey of love and overcoming. She knew that with Rafael and Pedro by her side, she could face any challenge the future might bring. 20 years had passed since that fateful day when Julia discovered Marcelo and Carla's betrayal. Life moved on, and Julia became a strong, successful, and confident woman. She built a solid career as an architect, opening her own firm and gaining recognition for her innovative and sustainable projects. Julia also enjoyed a loving family life with Rafael and Pedro, who was now 19 years old and about to enter university. To celebrate their accomplishments and enjoy a well-deserved break, Julia and her family decided to spend their vacation at a luxurious seaside resort. The place was stunning, with white sandy beaches, crystal-clear waters, and a welcoming atmosphere that promised days of relaxation and fun. Upon arrival, they were greeted with refreshing cocktails and impeccable service. On the second day of their vacation, the family decided to dine at one of the resort's most elegant restaurants, known for its exquisite cuisine and spectacular ocean view. Julia wore an elegant blue dress that highlighted her beauty and confidence, and Rafael, always affectionate, accompanied her closely, holding her hand. Pedro, excited about the trip, talked about the day's adventures and plans for the night. While waiting for their starter, Julia looked around the restaurant, admiring the sophisticated decor and cozy ambience. Suddenly, her eyes met a familiar face. A few meters away, sitting alone at a table near the window, was Marcelo. He recognized her instantly as well. Marcelo looked visibly aged, with wrinkles that hadn't been there 20 years ago and a melancholic expression that contrasted with the confident image he used to project. Julia felt a whirlwind of emotions. Painful memories resurfaced, mixed with the satisfaction of seeing how positively her life had changed. She observed Marcelo for a moment, noticing that he seemed lost and lonely, a shadow of the man she once knew. Julia remained calm. She took a deep breath, remembering all the challenges she had overcome and the victories she had achieved. She felt grateful to be there with her family, enjoying a happy moment and knowing that the past no longer had any power over her. Raphael noticed something different in Julia's expression and asked if everything was okay. She smiled and squeezed his hand, reassuring him. During dinner, Julia tried to keep her focus on the conversation with Raphael and Pedro, but occasionally her eyes wandered to Marcelo. He was alone, and his posture reflected regret and loneliness. Julia no longer felt anger, only a strange sense of indifference and compassion. She knew Marcelo had made his choices, and each one had led him to that lonely table. When the waiter brought dessert, Pedro excitedly talked about his plans for university, and Raphael shared a funny story from work. Julia laughed with them, feeling lighter and happier. Marcelo's presence in the same restaurant was no longer a burden but a testament to her triumph over the challenges life had thrown at her. At the end of dinner, as they stood up to leave, Julia cast one last glance at Marcelo. He watched her with a penetrating look, perhaps seeking some form of redemption or recognition. Julia nodded slightly in a gesture of farewell, showing that she no longer harbored any resentments. Raphael, Pedro, and Julia left the restaurant hand in hand, ready to enjoy the rest of their vacation, strengthened by the love and achievements they shared. Marcelo was divorced and alone, his past choices taking their toll. Life hadn't been kind to him in recent years. After his relationship with Carla ended, which dissolved a few years after it began, Marcelo never found a new partner who brought the same initial excitement. He found himself trapped in a cycle of superficial relationships and a stagnant career. His personal achievements felt empty, and he often reflected on the decisions that led him to where he was. Watching Julia with her husband and son at the luxurious resort restaurant, Marcelo couldn't help but notice the resemblance between Pedro and himself. The young man had unmistakable features, the same facial structure, the same smile, even the way he carried himself reminded Marcelo of his younger self. Each gesture and expression of the boy seemed to echo parts of Marcelo that he thought were lost in time. Intrigued, Marcelo began to think about the past and the possibilities. He remembered the happy days with Julia, how she was dedicated and loving, and how much he had scorned all that for a fleeting adventure. The memories assaulted him with unexpected intensity, bringing forth feelings of regret and melancholy. He wondered if Pedro could be his son. The dates made sense, and the physical resemblance was undeniable. Marcelo tried to recall if Julia had been pregnant when they broke up, but the betrayal and the years that followed had erased many details from his memory. As he continued to watch Julia and her family, Marcelo noticed the harmony between them. Raphael, Julia's husband, was clearly a man who loved and respected her. He looked at her with affection and treated Pedro as if he were his own son. The family environment Julia had built was the exact opposite of what Marcelo had. He felt a pang of envy and sadness, recognizing that he had lost something valuable because of his own poor choices. Marcelo observed Julia laughing and talking animatedly with Raphael and Pedro. She seemed happier and more fulfilled than he had ever seen her. This only heightened the feeling of emptiness within him. If Pedro was indeed his son, he had missed the chance to watch him grow, to be an important part of his life. The idea that he could have had a family with Julia, and that he threw it all away for a whim, tormented him. Marcelo's solitude at that lonely table was a reflection of his decisions. The weight of his past choices was palpable, and he felt crushed by the possibility of having a son he never knew. The night, which should have been a pleasant meal at a luxury resort, turned into a deep reflection on regrets and missed opportunities. The next day, the sun shone brightly over the luxurious resort, reflecting off the crystal-clear pool waters. Julia was relaxing on a lounge chair by the pool, reading a book and enjoying the tranquility. Pedro and Rafael were swimming together, laughing and having fun. The atmosphere was serene until Julia noticed a shadow approaching. Looking up, she saw Marcelo, with a serious expression and a mix of hesitation and determination. "Julia, can we talk?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Julia closed the book, her heart racing. "Sure, Marcelo. What do you want?" Marcelo took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I couldn't help but notice the resemblance between Pedro and me. He's my son, isn't he?" Julia felt a wave of emotions, initially reluctant to share the truth. She looked at Pedro and Rafael in the pool, enjoying their moment of relaxation, then turned back to Marcelo. "Yes, Marcelo. Pedro is your son." The revelation shook Marcelo to his core. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "I never imagined. Julia, why didn't you ever tell me?" Julia sighed, trying to maintain her composure. "You hurt me too much, Marcelo. I didn't want you to have any influence over Pedro. I needed to protect my son and ensure he grew up in a healthy and loving environment." Marcelo remained silent for a moment, absorbing Julia's words. "I understand, but I'd like to get to know him. I've lost so much time. Please, Julia, let me at least try." Julia was skeptical. She knew she would have to tell Pedro the truth, but she feared his reaction. After a long conversation with Rafael, they decided that the truth should be told. Rafael, always Julia's pillar of support, agreed that Pedro had the right to know about his biological origins. That night, Julia gathered her courage and called Pedro for a conversation on their room's balcony. The soft lights of the resort created a peaceful atmosphere, but Julia felt the weight of the imminent revelation. Rafael joined them, holding Julia's hand in support. "Pedro, we have something important to tell you," Julia began, her voice trembling slightly. "You know that Rafael came into our lives when you were 4 years old. Before that, there was someone else. Marcelo, the man you met today, is your biological father. He didn't know about you until now, and I never told him because I wanted to protect you." Pedro was shocked, processing the information. "So, Marcelo, he is my biological father." Rafael squeezed Pedro's hand, looking him in the eyes. "Pedro, I will always be your father, regardless of blood. Nothing will change that." Pedro, though shocked, understood why his mother had kept the secret for so long. He appreciated the protection and love he had always received from Julia and Rafael. "I understand, Mom. And Rafael, you will always be my father." Determined to know his roots, Pedro asked to meet Marcelo. The meeting was emotional and full of questions. Marcelo, with tears in his eyes, asked for forgiveness from Julia and Pedro for his past actions. He was truly remorseful and wanted to try to build a relationship with his son. I know I can't change the past, but I hope we can have some sort of relationship in the future, Marcelo said, his voice choked with emotion. Pedro, with Rafael's support, agreed to get to know his biological father, but he made it clear that Rafael would always be his true father. I want to get to know you, Marcelo, but Rafael will always be the father who raised me and was by my side. Julia, over time, forgave Marcelo, not for him, but to move forward and leave the past behind. She knew that forgiveness was the key to her own peace of mind and happiness. At the end of the vacation, Julia, Rafael, and Pedro returned home stronger and more united than ever. The truth, though painful, only reinforced the bonds between them. Marcelo remained at the resort, lonely but determined to build a relationship with Pedro, even if he had to start from scratch. Julia, with gratitude, looked at her family, aware that she had made the right choices to protect and love her son. Life went on, and they were ready to face any challenge together.